All right, I am so excited to have her on the program because you all know the tagline to this show. We talk to people who know what they're talking about. I have no idea about the legalities that former President Trump is facing right now, but somebody that's going to help me break it down is Lexie Rigden. She's a criminal defense and family law attorney over at Rigden Lieberman LLC. You can see her across CourtTV, CBS News, CNN, Fox. Lexie, thanks so much for hopping on the podcast with me.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Lexie, I was mentioning it before to you off air. I'll bring it over here. I truly want to get into some of the specifics that I feel are not being covered across the networks right now with respect to the indictment and now arrest, obviously, a former President Trump. We saw all the theatrics that happened this past week. There were so many moving parts. We're going to get into a bunch of it, but just for from your perspective, your legal perspective, but also as a viewer of television, you were telling me about your mom watching all the news and people hitting you up to ask news. What were some of the things that kind of stood out to you as all of this played out, as everything started to unfold over the last couple of weeks, and the former president announcing that he would be indicted on Tuesday? Now you see the charges. Like, what were some early things that just kind of stood out to you?
Well, what's interesting is that because it's President Trump and he courts the media, and I don't say that in a positive or negative way. That is a fact. He broke the news, which he's the one that came out and said, "I'm being indicted." So that was kind of the start of a media blitz. And what I noticed about the coverage, because I obviously watched a lot of it, it's an interesting topic. It's an unprecedented topic. So I watched a lot of the coverage, and what struck me is how very few people had sort of an objective centrist view on it. It was very polarizing, and maybe that was the spectrum of channels that I was watching also, but it was either this is politically motivated, it's a hit job, what about this, what about that, or it was he's the worst ever, and this is a national disgrace, and how could this possibly be? And he's like the most horrible person. This is the most serious thing. He could have given away our precious government secrets. And I'm sort of standing a little bit in the middle, where some people I've seen been, where I'm thinking there is a big part of me that does believe that the timing of it and the fact that it's being done is politically motivated in some way. But I still think that the indictment is pretty strong against him too. I mean, I was really surprised by some of the stuff that I saw in there. So I'm kind of standing in the middle. I mean, I can sort of see both sides, but I don't actually think they're mutually exclusive.
Yeah. I totally agree with that perspective because, one of the things, if you think about the charges, anytime you arrest a former president of the United States, it's going to be seen as politically motivating. You can't, there's no way around that.
There's no way to escape that.
There's no way around that. Exactly. So I'm kind of with you. Like, the truth lies somewhere in the middle, right? And I want to get into a little bit of the charges that, he was arraigned on, and, 37 federal charges: unlawful retaining of government secrets, conspiring to obstruct justice. We've had former FBI, CIA folks that have had a classification in this country on this program telling me about the documents case was always about not how many he had, what was in it. So let's talk a little bit about what is in it and what Jack Smith is actually charging the former president with. Can you take our audience a little bit inside? What are some of the legal challenges and hurdles that the former president is going to face mounting a defense here against these charges?
Well, there are 37 counts and seven separate charges, and they all basically center around having documents that he shouldn't have had. 31 of the counts are basically having documents he shouldn't have had that pertain to the national defense. And some of them are, obviously, they're not part of the indictment because they are classified, which is part of the problem. But they talk about our defense capabilities, battle plans in case things happen. So they're really sensitive documents. And then the rest of the counts center around one of the counts is co-conspiracy with Walt Nauta, who's his valet, he's obviously in very close contact with all the time, which you can tell from the indictment because there are text messages between Walt and family members and everything like that. And then basically obstructing justice, lying to investigators, telling his attorney, the allegation, of course, and this is all alleged, innocent until proven guilty. We always have to put that out there. But the allegation is that he wanted his attorney to not turn over everything, or quote unquote pluck out certain things, which apparently he made like a plucking motion trying to signal to his attorney that he didn't want to give everything over. And I mean, it wouldn't matter. I've had clients ask me to do unethical things, oh, do I not to that degree, of course, but do I have to disclose this on this affidavit? Well, yes, you do, because I'm not impugning my ethics for anybody. It's not worth my bar license, my livelihood. I'm not doing it. And I wouldn't have done it for Donald Trump either. So the attorney, I think in the indictment said, no, we have to turn everything over. And ultimately, those conversations are usually privileged, but it was pierced. The privilege was pierced on the crime fraud exception, where there's an exception to the attorney-client privilege rule that you can actually get information and that's not privileged if the communication is in furtherance of some type of fraud or crime. So that's how that was a big issue. It was litigated, but that's how they got that information from him, which is it's not good. It's really bad.
No, it is not
For
good.
lack of a more eloquent way to put it, it's not good information against Trump.
Well, and the other thing is like back to your original point, as you're watching this unfold and now you're getting opinions from senators, former Vice President Pence even said something to the effect of like, the charges are not good. They're definitely not good. And so I want to put your criminal defense attorney hat on. Now Donald Trump has enlisted you, Lexie, to defend him here in Miami in the federal courthouse here in these charges that he's facing. How do you build up a defense around, now that you're learning a little bit more particulars of the case? Obviously, you're not on the case itself, so you're not privy to discovery, but what are some of the things that you would try to mount defense-wise for the former president?
Well, first I would want to know his side of the story, because he keeps saying that it's inaccurate. So I would want to know what exactly in the indictment is inaccurate. I'd also want to know the old phrase, what he knew and when he knew it. I would want to know, what did he know about the boxes? How much, I mean, the indictment has a lot of detail, so it seems as though he knew that there were classified documents that he shouldn't have in his possession. But I would obviously want to get his side of the story, because he has gone on record and basically said there are things in this indictment that aren't true. So I would want to know that. I'd also want to know about biases, lack of credibility of the witnesses who, if this goes to trial, are going to be testifying against him, because impeachment is important in any trial, and credibility and bias is important in any trial. And people saying one thing and doing another and being able to call them on it, that's one of the most exciting things in a trial. Those are like the moments you live for as a lawyer. So all of those things I would want to know. And the other thing he's going to have to determine, and also Walt Nauta is going to have to determine, is they're co-defendants here. So they're not supposed to be talking to each other. That's a whole other issue that's going to have to be resolved, but like about the case anyway. But what do? Do they cooperate? Does one cooperate? Does one not? I mean, I could totally see Walt Nauta having an incentive to cooperate, because he doesn't have the coffers and hundreds of millions of dollars that Trump reportedly has to fight this. And he's just a guy that was employed by him. So he might flip. I mean, you just never know. So I'd want to know all of those things. And then if I were defending him, his best strategy, and a good strategy for any defendant really, is to try to kick the can down the road. That's the conventional wisdom. And that's why so many people waive their right to a speedy trial, because the farther it goes out, witnesses die, they forget, they become unavailable. And then the really funny scenario, which I frankly don't see happening, but that people keep saying, is what if he actually does get reelected and then he's in charge of the DOJ, and then he drops this, or he pardons himself if he's already convicted. So there are a million reasons that he would want to delay this out, because it's better to run for president and say that he's being basically picked on and bullied and this is all politicized. That's easier to say when the indictment and the charges are still pending, as opposed to, I was convicted by a jury of my peers. So he has every incentive to kick the can down the road, even if that means filing, I don't want to say frivolous motions, but they're no doubt going to be filing motions also. For legitimate reasons too. There are certain things that need to be clarified in terms of who he's allowed to speak to. So that would be my find out more information, find out the weak points of the people who are going to be testifying, and delay.
It's a good strategy. Sounds
Yeah.
like I want to get into, a lot of people, especially on the outlets, news networks across, are all focusing in on Judge Eileen Cannon and the ruling that she gave a while back and how she's going to be presiding over this. I don't want to focus on that necessarily because I want to focus on jury selection and my favorite two words in the legal dictionary, which is voir dire. The process of interviewing jurors. I told you before, I could potentially be jury duty selected here, living in the state of
Right.
Florida for this case. So I'm curious because a lot of podcasts and news outlets have kind of glossed over this part of it, which is Donald Trump. And when he ran against Hillary Clinton in 2016, when he ran against Joe Biden in 2020, he had over 40% population voting for him here in Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties, right? These are the three most populous counties down in Florida. So people down here know the former president. It's going to be incredibly hard to get 11, 12 jurors, 13, however many alternates it is, that don't know who the former president of the United States is. Can you take our audience a little bit into this jury selection process and why I feel like, or maybe I'm wrong, am I wrong, that no one's really talking about how hard this is going to be to get jurors that he may not even get convicted off of any of this because you get one person that has voted for the former president and it'll probably, get thrown out.
And it's okay if the jurors know who he is, because you're not going to find somebody that doesn't know who he is around the world. So it's okay if they know who he is. Where the rubber meets the road is whether they can be impartial despite what they know. So that's really going to be the issue. That's going to be the first issue in impaneling the jury. And then the second issue is going to be that jury nullification is a real thing. I mean, we saw in the OJ case. I mean, he was as guilty as the day is long, and the jury, for a lot of reasons that have been explored in many documentaries and books, decided to acquit him. So I'm not saying necessarily that this would be, you'd find 12 people who just decide to acquit Donald Trump if he is tried and it gets to that point. But that's a real thing, is finding a jury members who are actually able to be impartial. They might pass the initial test and say, yes, I'm impartial. I of course have heard of Donald Trump and I'm able to be impartial. But when they get in that room, is everybody going to be able to really put their feelings aside and unanimously vote on whether he's guilty or not guilty? That's going to be a big challenge because people feel very strongly about him. And there might be also some stealth jurors who want to be on the jury. So they answer everything right, only to get back there and try to influence.
Right. I'll tell you what, I do not want to be selected. Please, Miami-Dade, do not select me for
You can
this.
play this.
Yes.
You can play this for the judge. I don't think they'll select you.
I will.
think you know too much.
I will. See, that's why we had an attorney on, because I did not know that I could play that for them. Thank you so
Have them
much,
call me. Put it on your phone and be like, I can't be impartial. I am
Thank you.
not your guy.
Thank you. I truly appreciate that. All right. I want to get into, speaking of impartial or not impartial, I've been noticing a lot of Trump's defense team across multiple states, because remember, the former president obviously was charged in New York by the attorney general there. There's some stuff happening in Georgia, potentially, whatever comes out with that. But I've been seeing Aline Haba, I believe is her name. Alina, excuse me, Haba, and other Trump lawyers across the outlets. And I'm just curious from your perspective right now, because I asked you about mounting a defense for the former president, but what would you implore in terms of a strategy of getting the message out there? Because he seems to run to social media, or Sean Hannity, who's a friend of his, who hosts, a 9 p.m. show with 3 million people watching, and he runs there immediately to tell his message. But that could be used against them in the court of law. So what do you make of the strategy right now of the attorneys and the former president running to social media or television outlets to try to get ahead of this? Is it good? Is it bad? What do you make of it?
That's an interesting question. I think that you can't separate the fact that he's running for president from what he's doing. A normal defendant that no one's ever heard of is not going to talk about their case, because nobody knows about their case and nobody cares about their case. And then you have high profile people who might be getting in trouble, like an Alec Baldwin type. I mean, he spoke out a lot, and in some ways to his detriment, because he came off as kind of obnoxious, as he often does in some of his interviews. But with Donald Trump, he almost has to come out and say something. He almost doesn't have a choice to stay silent because there's so much media coverage and there is so many people saying on the left and the right. I mean, there's some people on the right saying that what he did was wrong and it's really bad, but people are coming out and saying that this is really serious. It's not a political hit job. This is different than the other cases, that occurred with other high profile people. Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, Mike Pence himself also had an issue with that. And, you could choose to stay silent as a high profile defendant if you didn't have the skin in the game of running for president. So I don't think he has a choice. He almost has to go out there. He's got to go out there and keep pounding the message into the general public's head that despite what everybody's saying, I didn't do anything wrong. And he has a whole team of lawyers who've been doing that for years now for him. I mean, he has, and a lot of, every big public figure has their talking heads that go out there and try to create good press for them and get their narrative out. So I don't blame him for doing it. And I think it's probably a large function of the fact that he's running for president. So he almost has to. But then again, the pretrial publicity of this case is already out of control. And that in and of itself is an issue, which brings up an important question that I had, which was, in these cases, a lot of times the court will say the pretrial publicity could possibly taint the trial, so we're going to gag people on certain topics. If there's a gag order in this case, it's going to be really interesting because how do you gag someone who is running for president and is going to have to talk about this? Because the voters have a right to know, even before a trial. Like, as a voter, you want to know what his side of the story is. You don't want him to be silent. You want him to say, this is true, this is false, or whatever his take on it is. So there are a lot of nuances with him speaking, but I think he really has no choice but to put it out there. And otherwise, as Daniel Penny's lawyer said, which I know we're also going to cover, he had come out and said as to a question as to why Daniel Penny was speaking out now, he said, if this goes on too long where he doesn't speak out, it's going to just become the narrative and there's not going to be any way to shake it. And so Trump has to take a strong stance with this, because given how he's been in the past, if he weren't speaking out and his people weren't speaking out, people would say, what's going on with him? Who is this? Is this the Donald Trump that we know for the past few years?
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. Quick break from our pod to tell you about a new pod at Fresh Roasted Coffee, Envy Pods. So if you go to freshroastedcoffee.com, my partner's shaking his head. That's a good transition. What are you kidding me?
It was good. No, I shook my head. I was like, that's brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you.
Because I saw this picture earlier. I was like, I saw what you're doing.
It is pretty good. That's right. So listen, the new Envy Pods over at freshroastedcoffee.com, the official sponsor of Can We Please Talk, environmentally safe, compostable. You can go check these out at freshroastedcoffee.com. When you open up the package, it smells delicious. I'm telling you, you can't smell it on here, but I promise you that when I opened this morning to make my cup of coffee, it was delicious. Head to freshroastedcoffee.com today. Use the promo code CANWEGET20 for 20% off your first order, or hit the link in our show details. Lexie, I wanted to ask you before we do move into that Daniel Penny and Jordan Neely trial. I mentioned her before about Judge Eileen Cannon, and obviously the ruling that she gave back a few months ago after the FBI did the search of Mar-a-Lago, and then obviously it got struck down by the appeals court and they kind of chastised her. But I'm curious from your perspective right now, and again, this speaks to the broader, if you were defending the former president type of question, but you have a judge that has previously ruled for your client in a different case. How do you go about kind of navigating that and having that type of judge on the bench? I'm not saying that she's being, improper or whatnot, but take us through a criminal defense attorney's mind, because there has to be in the NBA, whenever you see a referee refereeing your game, that oh no, I'm not going to get any calls tonight because of this guy. It's got to be that same way in the legal community. I would love to hear it though from a criminal defense attorney. Like, what do you make of the judge itself? Because it's being covered on all these outlets and everyone's kind of deep diving into her background and profile when it could be about other issues that are playing out in this whole trial. So what do you make of Judge Cannon presiding over this case?
Well, usually the judges, at least where I practice in New Jersey, they're just basically assigned to a certain docket. And a lot of it is basically, even as non-formulaic and simplistic as cases where the last name of the defendant is L through Z, and that's who the judge has. So they didn't choose her. She's on the bench, and she's in that division, and that's where she's sitting. And if I'm Donald Trump, I want her as my judge. I mean, I have a lot of cases where I'll tell a client, this is a good judge for this case, or this is not a good judge for this case. I have a client who, she has a bench warrant. She needs to turn herself in. And I'm hoping that when she does, I get a certain judge, because I know that he generally is lenient. And some judges aren't. Some judges will give, for example, someone doesn't show up to court, they don't have an excuse. Some judges, they're not going to be lenient on that person. They're going to want to lock them up. Another judge might take pity on them and say, okay, fine, you can have another chance. So that's just normal lawyering. So it doesn't matter if it's her or anybody else. The people who are representing both the state or the government and Donald Trump, who are local, they know the players, they know who these people are. And so if I'm Donald Trump's team, I'm not doing anything. I'm going to let the government make any type of motion that they think is appropriate, including recusal. And that's not going to be taken kindly by the judge. Judges hardly ever recuse themselves, because by recusing them, by granting a recusal motion, the judge is going to have to admit, yeah, you're right, I can't be impartial. Yeah, you're right, I am biased. Judges are just not, they're just not going to do that. And she's now, especially, she's high profile in a sense because she's a federal court judge, but she's even more high profile now. Her name is in the news. I can't imagine her saying, you know what, federal government, you're right, I can't be impartial because he appointed me and I made a good ruling for him. So I just don't think it's going to happen. Whether she's on the case ultimately, I don't know. It's really important for the trial. I'm sorry, not for the trial. It's important for the motions, because she's deciding motion. But when it comes to the trial, she's not the trier of fact. That's the jury. So it's different. Like, I practice, obviously, criminal defense and also family law. In family law, there are bench trials. And so the judge is the trier of fact and the trier of law. So the decision is in one person's hands in that instance. But in this scenario, the decision is really in the hands of the jury, although obviously pre-trial rulings and rulings during the trial certainly make a difference.
Lexie, I could talk to you about the legal system and all these cases, but before I let you go, we were alluding to it before about there's been so many high-profile cases over the past 6-7 months, and I'm a New York City kid, a subway rider, a bunch of different times throughout my life traveling into the city to work. You were mentioning about the Daniel Penny and Jordan Neely case. I've seen you on TV kind of talking about it. And now with everything that's kind of played out over the last couple of weeks with the president and the PGA Tour Live merger and what's going to happen there, this has kind of lost and been to the back burner, this case and this story, and it's kind of lost its luster. Can you kind of update our audience as to where it is in the legal process? Has there been a trial set? What do you expect will happen here in terms of Daniel Penny's defense team and what they will mount? And just take us through a little bit of that trial, because as a former New Yorker, this was one that kind of hit home. You always see folks that are on the subway that hey, stay away, give a little bit of space, and we kind of covered it here. But I would love to hear the legal analyst on this. Tell us a little bit more about this trial.
So he was indicted, and the grand jury voted to return the indictment yesterday. So the way it works is, at least in New York, he was charged. He came to court for an arraignment. He was charged, and then they, meaning the district attorney, have 6 months to indict him. If they don't indict him in 6 months, the charges get dismissed. They indicted him as of yesterday, which was like only a few weeks after he was charged. So now the case is on track in the future to go to a trial. The charges are not, if the grand jury had not voted to indict him, then the charges would have been dismissed and it would have been over for him and he could just go on and live his life. But now that they voted to indict him, eventually there will be a trial unless the case resolves in some other way. And we've seen cases similar. There was that bodega stabbing where a bodega owner was attacked. He fought back, and the same DA, Alvin Bragg, charged him with murder. And there was a lot of public outcry and support for him, and those charges were dropped. So anything can happen in these cases. I'm not sure that that's going to be the result in this one, but that's kind of where we are. So his next court date is July 17th. I don't know if that will be moved up. I certainly don't have that type of insider knowledge, but like I said with Donald Trump, he's probably going to want to delay this process as long as he can. He's facing significant penalties. He's facing 15 years. And this is really a heartbreaking situation for everybody involved.
You can catch Lexie across any television outlet where they're looking for legal expertise. I'm telling you, she's been everywhere. CourtTV, CBS News, CNN, MSNBC. She's a fantastic criminal defense and family law attorney.
Yet.
Oh, not MSNBC yet. I gave her one.
NBC.
NBC. I gave her.
Not MSNBC yet.
I gave her an extra one, though. You hearing that, MSNBC? Fine. Put her on TV. Lexie, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast. Continue
Thank you,
success.
Mike. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hey, thanks for watching the Can We Please Talk podcast. Whatever clip you just watched, we hope you enjoyed it. And we hope you stick around for some more. Subscribe to the channel. My partner's over here smashing the button. Come on, do him a favor. So hit subscribe.